Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today, sorry about that, I've got a bit of a sore throat. Anyway, so today we've got an 139 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. So we take a look at some of the wonderful mods I've been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we're going to be starting off with a couple of butterflies. So these both species of butterflies were done by Leaf and Phonetic, who does a really great job with all sorts of little things. So we're going to be starting off right now with the paper kite butterfly. So let's have a look at these little cuties. Let's see. They're your perfect position there. So this is a little paper kite butterfly. So this is Idea lacone. That's a scientific name. So these guys are called the paper kite butterfly, or the rice paper butterfly, or the large tree nymph. They're a butterfly that's especially known for their presence in a lot of butterfly houses or live butterfly expositions. They have a wingspan of about 12 to 14 centimeters. And the paper kite is believed to come from southeastern Asia, but also can be found in southern Taiwan and the Ryukyu Islands. So they do feed on different species of poisonous plants, very similar to like monarchs. They'll feed on like milkweed, things like that. They do feed on poisonous plants, so they're poisonous themselves. And in terms of their forewings, you can see their hind wings and forward hind wings are translucent with these silvery white spots. So it kind of gives its name as paper. So it's like thin like paper, especially when you put them into the sky. Yeah, like that, which is really cool. And there's all sorts of different subspecies all across their range. They do have a wide range to like Malaysia, Sumatra, into the Philippines and Borneo, and even some parts of the, as I mentioned, like Taiwan and Ryukyu Islands. But yeah, really, really cool. So if you've seen the baby ones or the caterpillars, they've got very interesting, striking larvae. So it's like black and white stripes and these black spikes and also these red spots on them. So really, really cool. Not too much about this guy. They're not too different from other butterflies, but we're going to be moving on now. So next up, by Leaf and Phonetic as well, we have got the just Amasa Priscilla, I believe you say that. Here it's just called the butterfly. It's just a little bit of a issue with we'll have a look. There's one of the lights. Just issue with the low LOCs and things like that, the localizations. This is a really interesting species. So this is a species of moth, even though it's called a butterfly, from the burlet moth family, and was described by Frederick William Hope in 1840, and has quite a wide range. It's typically found around Southeast Asia, from northern India right into Myanmar, Laos, into Vietnam, China, places like that, and right into Taiwan and Japan, and is a type species. So in terms of description, it's a burlet moth, and it's a moderately large moth as well. They get to about 70 to 80 millimeters, or about 2.83 inches, or 80 millimeters. So that's about 7-8 centimeters. And their wings, you can see, are quite bright, which is actually a little bit weird for a moth. And it serves an asymmetric pattern, so it's kind of like turquoise, mottled with black and white, and besets that foraging pattern. And there's a little bit of difference between all the different subspecies, with the mainland Japanese subspecies being the darkest color, and then the Okinawa subspecies being lighter colors, which is quite interesting. And they're considered one of the most beautiful moth species in the world because of their bright colors, because most are really dark colors. And this asymmetric coloring, which is what it means, so really bright coloring, is due to the toxic nature of this moth species. So the actually body contains hydrogen cyanide throughout all its life stages. So, and as an extra form of defense as well, they can actually emit noxious chemicals from their heads in the form of foam for protection, which is interesting. And very weird for moths. They're actually diurnal too. So they visit flowers during the day. Adult moths will use their proboscis to drink nectar, and then at rest they will cover their hind wings will cover their forewings, and they rest on top of the hind wings when closed, which is quite interesting. So as I mentioned, there is quite a few different subspecies as well. There's 6 different subspecies that range across their range. In terms of life history, they do feed on all sorts of different little plants. And the larvae are actually quite big in size. They are typically covered in black tubercles and hairs, and they have a yellow segment down their middle or rear that covers about the middle 2 of their body segments. And on this side, they also have red spikes where they can emerge from their body, and also can hydrocide from their tubercles as well for defense. When they form a cocoon, they form it under the surface of leaves or in the crevice of bark of trees. They also will emerge about twice a year, so typically June or July or August at first emergence, and then the second emergence is September to October. They'll fly during the day and often found in forests, but that are attracted to light. They are, additionally will fly in low to mid altitude mountain areas, though they tend to fly high in the air compared to other moth species. They feed on nectar and spend most of their time searching for food. And to deter predators, I mentioned they emit noxious chemicals from a form of foam in the neck area that is called it's a form of cyanide that does not cause a reaction with human skin, but can be washed up with water. But that's that can startle the sudden chemical explosion can startle people trying to collect them though. The compound is derived from the larval diet of the toxic plants they eat, and the toxins are stored within their body during the larval stage. Adults do not accumulate toxins, so all the toxins in their body come from when they're a baby or when they're a caterpillar, and then when they become the adult moth, they will still have that poison. It comes from their diet. And the location actually varies on which different subspecies. Some will have it from the tips of the legs, others from the base of the wing, just depending on the particular subspecies, which is quite interesting. And in terms of their distribution, they are quite widely found. They can be found in Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and as far east as Taiwan and Japan. There are 4 different subspecies in Japan, with some near the Ryukyu Islands, also Kiri Peninsula, and there's lots of different variation within the different areas, things like that. The dominant subspecies, though, which is most likely what this one is based on, is from northern India. It was first described in northern India, but there's other subspecies around the world. But yeah, really, really cool. Do love these little butterflies. Oh, actually, moths. I keep saying moths. It's just that with the butterfly there. So these guys, the moth and the butterfly here, both done by Leaf and Phonetic. They always really do an awesome job with their mods. I'm always a big fan. So next up, we've got another cute little guy. We've got the European tree frog by Narwhal. Really, really cool little froggy. So let's have a look at these guys. Look at this little friend. Let's see if we can find one in the light. Perfect. Oh, here we are. Perfect little friend. Look at you, little frog. I love frogs. Anyway, so the European tree frog is a small tree frog that was, as traditionally defined, it was lived most through Europe, Asia, and Northern Africa. But based on molecular genetics, actually has been split into quite a few different species. So it's kind of figuring out where their ranges are now. So there's a few that live near Italy and one near Northern Africa. So they're split into different species. But typically these guys are smallish frogs. They get to about 32 to 43 millimeters or 1.3 to 1.7 inches in length. And females range from 40 to 50 millimeters or 1.6 to 2 inches in length. You can see they're slender with long legs. They have smooth dorsal skin, with their skin being glandular. They also have like this kind of ventral stripe with a whitish color, then like a darkish one and a brown lateral stripe as well. The females have white throats, while the males have golden brown throats that they use for the vocal sacs, which are folded in. And the head of these guys are rounded with that like horizontal pupil, very typical of most frogs. There's also discs on the feet of the frogs that allow them to climb up all sorts of different hedges and trees and things like that, and it's characteristic of the species. And like other frogs, they do have much bigger hind limbs that allow them to jump around. So what this species is now is considered a hybrid species complex, so there's lots of different species within it. So members of the species complex are only representative of the tree frog family that are native to mainland Europe, and they're found across most of Europe, northwestern Africa to temperate Asia and Japan, but a lot of them are being split into different species. Pretty much all the countries that you can think of as well have been have them. And actually they were introduced into the United Kingdom, and it's actually a bit of a debate whether they're native or introduced. So and there was believed to be at least one British population is thought to be native. So there's historical evidence that suggests that the species in the UK could have actually been hunted to extinction by people for overcollecting for medicines, or potentially just habitat destruction as well. But luckily there's Celtic Rewilding, which is a small company like working with herps, trying to rewild them in the UK, is trying to reintroduce them. And have also been reintroduced into Latvia, which is quite cool. So the typical habitats these guys like are marshlands, damp meadows, reed beds, gardens and vineyards and things like that with everything humid. They tend to avoid dark and thick forests though, and can tolerate some period of dryness, so they can live in some drier habitats. So in terms of historically, these guys were actually parameters to when rain was approaching because they started croaking. And depending on the subspecies and the frog's mood and temperature, things like that, the skin can actually range from bright olive green to grey brown yellow. And they feed on a variety of small arthropods such as flies, spiders, butterflies, caterpillars, things like that. And being able to leap allows them to eat a lot more, which is cool, like especially like fast insects. They hibernate in wall cellars under rocks and vegetation, and buried leaves and manure pilers as well. And in terms of reproduction, these guys like to reproduce in stagnant bodies of water, such as lakes, ponds, swamps, reservoirs, or even puddles. From late May to June, they croak during the breeding season, even when migrating to their mating pools or ponds, and males will often change breeding ponds even within the same breeding season. And after the spring rain, the males will call females from low vegetation and shallow ponds, and typically about 800 to 1,000 eggs are laid in a clump the size of a walnut. Each individual egg is about 1.5 millimeters in width, diameter, and about 10 to 14 days the eggs will hatch, and then after 3 months the tadpoles will metamorphosize into frogs. And typically metamorphosis takes place between July to early August, and they live quite a long time. They can live up to 15 years. So, as I mentioned, they are considered least concern because of their wide range and things like that. But there are signs that the habitat is, well, because of habitat destruction, climate change, catching for the pet trade, destruction of their habitat like wetlands and things like that, pesticides, fertilizers, um, increased UV radiation as well. It suggests that these guys' populations are declining, so they may actually be put up to vulnerable. But luckily, there are efforts to try and help them. As I mentioned, they're trying to reintroduce them to the UK. There's also attempts to restore woodlands and breeding ponds and uh, wetlands and all that to try and help them. So they're a species of conservation concern, but they're not a huge concern. But luckily, there is some efforts to help them, even though they may be declining. So hopefully, there's a little bit more research on these guys, and they can get a little bit more protection just to help them out because they're quite cute. And Nirwala, of course, always does a wonderful job with these guys. Really, really awesome. So our last exhibit animal for today, we have got the yellow-spotted Amazon river turtle. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but we will have a look at one in the water. Let's see if we can find it. There we are. Little friend. So this guy was done by Joseph AF95, I think that's correct. I'm pretty sure that's the right name, but I'll put it, of course, in the description. So the yellow-spotted Amazon river turtle, or Pododemus unifilis, also known as the yellow-headed side-necked turtle or the yellow-spotted river turtle, is one of the largest South American turtles, river turtles. So they are a type of side neck, so called because they don't pull their head in directly like a lot of tortoises and turtles do. They actually pull it into the side, which is most common around like the southern hemisphere. But they rather bend them sideways, and they're classified as the suborder Pledora. So they're quite large, so much larger than your typical kind of little terrapins. These guys get to about 45 centimeters long and can weigh up to 8 kilograms. So in the game, they are a little bit too small, but still it's just huge animals. So this species can be recognized by its brown oval carapace and its low keels as well on the second and third scutes. And the yellow spots on its head give this species its common name. And these spots can be most prominent in juveniles, and they typically fade a little bit with age. And females can be quite big, up to twice the size of the males. So in terms of their distribution and habitat, these guys can be found in South America's Amazon or Orinoco basins, as well as river systems in Guyana, and typically are found in tripuches, large lakes, and naturally calm waters as well. So during the flood season, turtles may actually venture into flooded forests or floodplains, and they feed on fruits, seeds, weeds, aquatic plants, fish, and smaller vertebrates. Typically, in terms of breeding, they'll lay about 2 clutches of eggs each year, each with about between 4 to 35 eggs. And they make these nests in sandy areas along the riverbanks, and these eggs will hatch about 66 to 159 days after they've been laid. The eggs are laid during the peak of the dry season, so the nests are not washed away when the floods come in the raining season. Eggs are typically between 30, incubated below 32 degrees Celsius will hatch as males, and those above 32 degrees will hatch as females. So within a few days of hatchling, the young turtles will actually begin to forage and find their own food, and they don't need help from mum. They're pretty much ready to go out right at the go. And they feed on all sorts of things like vegetable matter, grasses, fruits, carrion, and mollusks. So they eat a lot more protein when they're a little bit littler to help grow a bit faster. So really, really cool animals. So these guys are actually one of the foreign species exported from the American pet trade, turtle trade in 1960s. And the species is at risk of predation, especially as babies, by humans, birds, snakes, large fish, frogs, and mammals. And now importation of the species is restricted, but there's a captive self-sustaining population in the US, which is good. Some in zoos, some in private collectors, and they've been known to live up to 30 years in captivity, so still quite long-lived. They are considered vulnerable because of most of the issues, happening in the Amazon, habitat destruction, climate change also, because they're temperature determinant sex of the eggs. So as the world gets warmer, we get like skewed sex ratios. So that's a big issue for these guys. But luckily, they are doing okay for the most part, and definitely little cuties. Joseph definitely did a great job with these little guys. So big fan. So we've got another one here. We're going to our habitat animals. This is by Lorby, who's actually remade one of his, I believe, original monkey pack that I did a while ago. So this is their remake of the Lahosette monkey. It's a really, really cool little guy. So there's a Hosette monkey, or Alocolobus alhosi, or the mountain monkey. There's a Gunan from the upper eastern Congo basin, where they typically live in like mountainous areas, things like that. So as I mentioned, they were formerly described as the genus Hedopithecus, but they're now their own genus, then actually more closely related to vervet monkeys and panthus monkeys as well. So that's quite interesting as well. So in terms of their physical characteristics, these guys have a short dark brown coat with a chestnut color across the back and have a dark belly. Their cheeks, you can see, are light grey as well, with a pale moustache, which is also quite interesting. In head to body length, the body length's typically about 12.5 to 27 inches, or 32 to 69 centimeters, with a 19 to 39 or 48 to 99 centimeter tail. The males will typically weigh about 6 kilograms, while females weigh about 3.5 kilograms, so that's 13 pounds and 7.7 pounds. And the tail is long and hook-shaped at the end, and they are born fully coated with their eyes open, so that's quite good as well. So in terms of their range, they typically occur in the northeastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and Western Uganda, where they live in high and moist primary forests, but have been found to occupy in all sorts of different types of rainforests and forest habitats. They've also been known to live in cultivated lands. So their lowland forests, so as a preference to regenerating, they'll kind of go down there. And one of these shows a population only above 900 meters, but another found at 610 meters. But they've been observed much higher in all sorts of different places. So let's have a look at one that's actually running around. Where's one? Oh, we'll have a look at you up here. Look at this cool guy. Definitely a big fan. So these guys will live in small family groups dominated by females and only have a single male. The females are usually related, but the male will only stay between a couple weeks to a couple years, and the adult male will make very loud and distinct calls. They're active during the day, mostly during early morning and late afternoon, so they're crepuscular. They sleep in the trees in a sitting position, usually either holding branches or onto each other. And when they are alarmed or see that they're being observed, they will flee and take shelter in trees, and after become very still, and they are mostly terrestrial. So in terms of breeding, let's find a cute little baby. There is a cute little baby in here I want to find. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Oh, there he is. Little cutie. So this is the little baby. So they breed seasonally, and the timing will depend on their area. And after about 5 months gestation, these guys will be single young as born. The mother will typically give birth at night and wherever she happens to be at the time. So births usually occur at the end of the dry season, and that allows lactation to be when rainfall is highest. So she will also eat the placenta and lick the baby clean while it hangs from onto her belly, which is quite interesting as well. And the other females in the group will show much interest in the newborn and try to hold it. After a few months, nursing will become less frequent, but it will continue for about 2 years when there's another birth. And then when male offspring reach sexual maturity, they will often go and leave, but the females will stay. And in captivity, they've been known to actually live for more than 30 years, which is quite cool. So the diet for these kind of monkeys is not too different from other types. So they're primarily herbivores, so they'll eat roots and leaves. They've also been known to eat fruits and mushrooms and herbs, so quite a varied diet. And however, they have been known to supplement that with, of course, like eggs, lizards, and small birds. So yeah, really, really cool little monkey here. Nice to cover these guys again. So next up, we've got a couple mods by Great Cake Mods, a couple of lovely birds. So we've got here, this is the Atlantic puffin, which is quite cool. So this is done by Great Cake Mods. So the Atlantic puffin, also called the common puffin, they are a species of auk and the only puffin from native to the Atlantic Ocean, with the two other species, the tuft and horn puffin, actually being found in the northeastern Pacific, which is quite cool. So they're a member of the seabird order Chacariformidae, which is the auk family. So they have like auks, merlets, and guillemots, things like that. They're in that kind of group. And the genus Fracticrula, which is, I believe, with other species as well, like the couple species of puffins, which is interesting. There are about 3 different subspecies recognized, but only really defined by their size. I'm not sure there's actually much actually looking into them, so they may actually just be monotypic. So when you say there's no subspecies, it's just bird people like describing different subspecies if they live on different islands, but most likely monotypic. So you can see they're quite sturdily built with a thick neck and short wings and tail. They get to about 28 to 30 centimeters, or about 11 to 12 inches long, from the tip of their snout to the blunt end tail. Their wingspan is about 47 to 63 centimeters, or between 19 to 25 inches. And on land, they will stand about 20 centimeters, or about 8 inches high. Males are generally larger than the female, but they are colored pretty much the same. So in terms of the colors, you can see they're typically black and white, so the forehead and crown and napes are like a glossy black, as well as their back, wings, and tail. And then on their belly here, and then on their face, you can see they're quite brightly colored, quite, not brightly colored, but quite white and all that. So they've got very strong counter shading. They've got very triangular eyes as well, because of how their coverts actually work as well. And the irises are brown to very dark blue, but during the end of the breeding season, the black plumage may actually lose its shine and take like a tightly brown tinge, just because it's a little bit, not as good condition. And their legs are short and are set well in the back where they stand upright. And they both have legs larger with web feet and can be bright orange, and also quite sharp claws. But what really sets these puffins apart are their quite distinctive beaks. So from the side, they've got very broad triangular beaks, but few of them above, they're actually quite narrow. The half near the tip is like an orange-red, and then the one near the body or near the mouth is, or near the face is like quite like state grey. There's also like a ridge of yellow between the two parts, and where they join, it's kind of a rosette. And typically, it's not as broad in juveniles as it is the adult, and with time, actually, the bill will deepen and kind of show up and actually shall form that red portion, and they do have quite a powerful bite, which is probably a little bit for the ecology. Those characteristics actually develop in the summer, so when it's close to the breeding season, when they start to do a partial molt, so what they do, they may appear less broad and look darker grey, and then kind of the colours will kind of perk up right begun the breeding season. So the winter plumage is actually seldom seen by humans, because where they have left their chick, the birds will head out to sea and not return to land, so we actually don't know what their winter plumage is really like, because we don't see them that often out on the ocean. But this is the juvenile plumage is quite similar to the adult plumage, but typically probably a little bit lighter or a little bit darker. But then each year they will return with this brighter colours, and that's when we see them on movies and documentaries with all the bright colours and things like that. So these guys are also quite direct flyers, so they typically will fly 10 meters above the sea surface, or even higher out of the water than most auks. And they've been mostly moved by paddling along with its web feet, and actually not seen very often in the air. And they're typically silent in sea, but they will make short purring sounds sometimes in flight. But in breeding colonies, they're quite above ground, but make lots of squealing sounds and growling sounds, actually quite similar to a chainsaw being revved up in their burrows, which is quite interesting. So these guys prefer the colder waters of the North Atlantic. They breed along northwestern Europe, the fringes of the Arctic, and eastern North America, and more than 90% of the global population is found in Europe. And colonies in Iceland actually have about 60% of the world's puffins. So they like to breed on offshore islands where they're not predators like mammals, like foxes and bears and things like that. But at sea, they range right across the North Atlantic, so up to the North Sea and even entering the Arctic Circle. In the summer, their southern limits can be northern France and Maine, typically where they are, but they've also been reported in like the Labrador Sea as well. And they are quite a long-lived bird with a small clutch size, so the survival rate for adults is important. So about only 5% of ringed puffins that fail to reappear during the colony. So a lot of them, if they're born, will obviously grow up to be adults, which is quite interesting. So in terms of these guys' behavior, so like many different seabirds, they spend most of the year out on the ocean, far from land, and only visit coastal areas to breed. So at sea, they live a solitary existence, just flying and swimming on the ocean. and they'll actually bob like a cork, propelling themselves with the powerful thrusts of their feet to keep on the wind. Now, they spend most of their day preening, they use spreading oil all over themselves with their preanal gland, and they actually have the counter shading to help defend themselves against predators. And in terms of food and feeding, these guys almost eat entirely fish, but they've been seen to occasionally eat shrimps, crustaceans, mollusks, and polychaete worms, especially in more coastal waters. And when they're fishing, they'll actually swim underwater and use their paddles to fly through the water. And they can swim quite fast and actually can stay submerged for over a minute, for up to a minute. And they eat shallow-bodied fish as long as 18 centimeters or about 7 inches, but prey is typically under 7 centimeters. And an adult bird needs to eat about 40 of these a day, and most common species is capelin herring, sand eels, and spats being fed on most often, which is quite interesting. So they can swallow small fish when submerged, but larger specimens have to be brought to the surface to eat, and can eat several fish in a dive. And they also have cope with excess salt in their diet by with their kidneys. So they have larger kidneys that they excrete all the extra salt glands. Also, they have salt glands in their nostrils. So on land, they're very interesting behavior. So in the spring, they'll return to land on their colony. Birds that remove their checked release elsewhere actually will move to their points of liberation. So they congregate, and then we'll have a large puffin colony. They'll all either dig burrows or hang up their burrows. So they're usually monogamous, but this is a result of the fidelity of nesting sites rather than their mates. And they'll be monogamous. So they're quite cautious as well when approaching colony. They don't like to land in locations with other puffins present. And often they'll have fights for each other. They'll often try to establish dominance. So they use an upright stance and fluff their chest feathers. And there's lots of gaping and slow walking to kind of scare each other off. So they typically will the submissive bird will kind of slink away, and they'll obviously get there. So the bird that is started at largest take off unexpectedly, and they'll stand outside their burrows. And they're quite energetic burrows and repairers. So on grassy slopes, they will make networks of tunnels, and they can. This causes the tuff to dry out during the summer and wither in the wind. Burrows sometimes collapse, and sometimes humans may have to help sometimes. And a colony was actually lost to erosion because there was so little soil that was left. The burrows could not be made. And new colonies are very unlikely to start sporadically because these birds only nest with others already present, and which is quite interesting. But so it is kind of important to protect these sites where you find the babies. So in terms of reproduction, typically they spend the time on the water alone, but they come back to breed in the summer. There's a little baby here. So inland, they'll scoot and kind of improve or clean out the burrow, and apart from nest building, they restore their bonds by billing. So they kind of come up, approach each other and they wag their heads from side to side and wrap their bills together to kind of be like, hey, I missed you. They're typically sexually mature at about 4 to 5 years and are colonial nesters, so they all nest and excavate burrows and things like that, almost very similar to a rabbit. They may even take over rabbit warrens and kind of just extend it a little bit for them. So egg laying for them starts in April, and more southerly colonies will do it in June. Laying a single white egg, but if it's lost early in the breeding season, they might produce another. Synchronization laying of eggs in burrows, they'll lay pretty much the same time as other species. And the incubation is shared by both parents, so they'll take turns. The total incubation for these this time is about 39 to 45 days, and above ground level, the first evidence that hatching is taking place that one of the adults will have a beak load of fish, and for the first few days they may be fed from a beak to beak, but the latter times fish will just be dropped to their mouths. Typically the chick is covered in quite fluffy down, then is fed by the parents because they can't go out and swim for themselves yet. They sleep most of the time, but they will get their parents. The parents will get them to exercise. They rearrange also nesting material, pick up small stones and flap its wings, things like that. And the growing chick is kind of getting ready, and then they start to fledge. A few 35 to 50 days later. So then they will fledge. It depends on the period though, but they will kind of reach that size and then be able to go off and swim, and then kind of not actually return to land for about 2 to 3 years, and that's when they find their mate and start the cycle all over again. So in terms of their conservation status, I believe they are considered least concern. Let me just check. They are considered least concern. No, they're vulnerable, as we'll go into. So their status, they do have a wide range across Europe and the Northern Atlantic. There's believed to be about 4 to 6 million pairs, but they are considered vulnerable because there's been noted declines. And before 2018, the total population was maybe 12 to 14 million adult individuals. But things like climate change, disturbance of breeding sites, uh, and declining food supplies, also toxic residue, fish nets, also bycatch is a big issue for these guys. But also another issue is rats being introduced to their breeding islands where they like to obviously breed. They're not really good at dealing with predators on their islands where they breed. That's a big issue for these guys, but luckily there are lots of efforts to try and help protect them. Getting rid of rodents on their breeding islands, uh, looking at poisons. So they're great bioindicators actually because of pollutants accumulating in these guys. So they're great ways of telling how the environment's doing. But luckily, there's obviously reducing pollution. Climate change is a big issue since they'll be moving more northernly uh, to find more food. Tourism as well could be a little bit of an issue because we obviously can disturb their nests. And historically, they were hunted, not so much anymore, but luckily they're doing pretty much okay now. So yeah, another really great mod by Great Cake Mods. A really nice little puffin. Definitely a big fan. So next up, we have got, last but certainly not least, we've got the Wedge-Tailed Eagle. So this is the Tasmanian Wedge-Tailed Eagle, as we'll go into. Very, very cool bird. So they're actually the largest bird of prey found in Africa. I mean, not Africa, Australia. I don't know why I said Africa. But anyway, so these guys are the genus Aquila, which is quite interesting. And there's two different subspecies. There's the mainland subspecies, typically, that lives in New Guinea, but there's the Tasmanian one, which is like a little bit bigger, and is it like a darkish chocolate brown rather than a blackish color. And there's not really much evidence of gene flow, things like that between them, but still, they're a subspecies, just a little bit of an isolated population down in Tasmania. So in terms of their description, they're very large and quite lanky birds. They're typically a tartar charcoal color, but as I mentioned, the Tasmanian ones are a little bit browner. They have a massive bill, but relatively short and flat heads, and a very long, almost vulture-like neck. And they also have kind of like almost baggy feathered trousers, and they spend most of their time perching on dead trees, telegraph poles, rocks, or at times even open ground. And between the bill size, these species is highly distinctive, so you can't really mix them up with other species often. They also have a very large portion of bare facial skin, as you can see here. That's also be an adaptation to warm weather climate rather than carrion eating, since this can be found in kind of non-carrion eating other species of eagles. And juveniles, as you can see, are also mainly darkish brown. Let's see if we can find the juveniles. Let's see, where's the juveniles? There's one there. You can see a little darkish brown there, with rufous colouring and a pale head. And but the juveniles has a lighter brown one as well. And young typically are much the same to the second to their fourth years, and may be actually indistinguishable until they molt. Adults actually have dark brown eyes, and juveniles usually have these dark eyes as well. They also have creamy feet. You can see that there. And they have a unique molt process, as they'll actually molt almost continuously and very slowly, and it may take up to 3 or more years for an eagle to molt completely, which is quite interesting. And most birds will either do it within a year, or like some penguins, they do the catastrophic molt where they'll molt it all in one big go. That's quite interesting. So in terms of their size, they're actually one of the world's largest eagles, and their nearest rival in Australia, nearly rivaled in Australia for size, which is interesting. It's 15% smaller and 25% lighter. So it's typical of birds of prey. Females a little bit larger. So a full-grown female will get between 3 to 5.8 kilograms, or 6.6 to 12 pounds, with smaller males being between 2 to 4 kilograms, or 4.4 to 8.8 pounds. And their total wing length varies from 81 to 106 centimeters. Or total length varies from 81 to 1.6 centimeters, or about 32 to 42 inches. And the wingspan is typically between 182 and 232 centimeters. So that's between 6 foot and 7 foot 7. In the 1930s, the average weight was about 3.4 kilograms and 2.43 centimeters, so basically 8 inches. So that's kind of what it is as well. So there's a lot of different variation with some areas. I believe the Tasmanian ones are slightly larger. There's actually one in Tasmania, a female killed in Tasmania that was about 284 centimeters and 9 feet long, and another female that was about 9 foot 2. However, these are kind of erogenous claims. Typically, on average, depending on areas you go, some areas are a little bit smaller, some areas are a little bit bigger, especially like the Tasmanian ones, typically a little bigger because they live a little bit more south. And they're up there with a lot of the bigger eagles. So like Steller sea eagles, vitreous eagles as well, Philippine eagles, bald eagles, so they're up there. with the biggest ones, which is quite interesting. And they're quite easy to identify, mainly their large sizes. You can't really get them confused with many other species, especially if you're in Australia. In terms of their vocalizations as well, they're actually not well known for them, as they may be silent most of the time, but they have been documented doing some calls, like an I see kind of call. Uh, and it's like almost like a melancholy as well. And females typically will have a lower and harsher call than the males. So, in terms of the habitat, they can be found throughout Australia as well as southern New Guinea and even down in Tasmania. They can be found pretty much everywhere, even on some offshore islands like Cape Barren Island in Tasmania, also the South Cumberland Islands, Kangaroo Island. So, they're quite well um, adapted for all these habitats, and they can be found in all sorts of different habitats as well, like woodlands, savannas, in the outback, mountain peaks, grasslands, wetlands, conifer trees, monsoon forests, as well as eucalyptus as well. So very, very generalized habitats. They can be found pretty much everywhere. In terms of behavior, they're an impressive bird of prey that spends most of their day looking over the areas, looking for food, and they even look on like ant hills or termite mounds and sit on them. So they typically have highly aerial, and they'll soar for long periods of time, up to about 1,800 meters, oftenly, and sometimes higher as well. And during intense heat at the middle of the day, they'll often soar really high in the air and allows them to kind of get away from a lot of that heat. So they're largely sedentary, and they're typically wrapped to develop for the subtropics as well as temperate zones. However, juveniles of the species have been known to disperse quite widely between like 836 to 868 kilometers. So they've been seen to fly all sorts of different places as well. In addition, they have been found in moving different areas for droughts, things like that, but they're kind of a partial migrant, so it just depends on the situation. And they're actually the only bird that has a reputation to not infrequently actually attack hang gliders and paragliders, which is interesting, and which is quite interesting as well. And there has been some reported attacks that they've destroyed unmanned vehicles, like drones, when they're kind of in a way. So typically, the presence of this eagle also scares off smaller birds, especially like talked passerines, lapwings, miners, as well as small falcons and things like that. And any of them will actually mob eagles sometimes, try and get their prey and just try to get away from them, like especially magpies because they're very defensive of their nests. They typically do not engage them, and sometimes they won't fly away just to like not deal with it. And they've even been seen playing games with dogs and trying to play with dogs, which is quite interesting. So their dietary behavior, they're actually one of the most powerful avian predators. They've been called the king of birds, quote unquote. So like other species of eagles, they have quite good vision, quite good sense of flight as well. They're really good at flying, we're able to catch prey with really big talons, not too different from other eagles. So hunting can be highly variable and depends on what they want to eat. They've been known to take out other birds. Sometimes eagles eat small mammals. We'll talk about that. They've been known to hunt in pairs or groups acting cooperatively. So there's been on record of 15 wedge-tailed eagles hunting kangaroos, which is quite interesting. And they have been seen land near livestock to intimidate them to separate their young and then eat the babies. And so there's all sorts of different prey that they'll eat. So in terms of the prey spectrum, they're quite a generalist. So they'll feed on all sorts of little birds and reptiles like bearded dragons, rep things, and then they'll range up to eating wallabies and kangaroos even, and sometimes they'll hunt together, but mainly small mammals and birds, mainly. So they also eat like rabbits, so they're great in controlling them in terms of native, but they'll feed on wallabies, lambs, juvenile pigs, as well, feral piglets, red foxes too, so they're invasive. In terms of natives, they'll be eating green and red kangaroos when they're hunting together, up to about 20 kilograms. Western grey kangaroos, wallabies, they'll be eating those tree-dwelling kangaroos, pademelons, things like that, especially around like Tasmania. Bush-tailed possums, got ringtails, bandicoots, quolls, pretty much anything small enough that they can grab. They've also been occasionally seen taking platypuses and echidnas, also like house mouses as well. Although rare, they have been taken by dingoes. That's kind of one of the few predators, and they have been known to gang up and eat other prey and scavenged on things such as like buffalo and sandbar deer in the Northern Territory. So they are pretty generalist. And they do actually help a little bit with invasive species. They do eat a lot of invasive species, as mentioned, like red foxes and rabbits and things like that, which is quite interesting. In terms of birds, they're pretty generous. They'll mainly eat like corvid species, like ravens and magpies, ducks, cockatoos and parrots. So they do have quite a bit of variety in that. Also bush turkeys, cuckoos, malleefowl, pretty much whatever. As well, in terms of reptiles, they feed on bearded dragons, skinks, shinglebacks, even monitor lizards like sand goannas, which is pretty interesting. But in terms of reptilian prey, they prefer bearded dragons. Sorry about that, bud. Just I have a bearded dragon, so that's kind of fun. But in terms of predator relationships, they have a fairly unique niche. They're kind of almost like the top predator. So they do share their obviously ecology with like little eagles and white sea eagles, but they kind of a little bit more generous in that regard. And sea eagles prefer to be near the ocean, and little eagles are smaller, hunting smaller prey, which is quite interesting. In terms of breeding, the breeding seasons from like July to December, though much of their range, or about like May onwards, they have a distinct tendency to lay early in the northern part of the range, and typically in Tasmania, which these guys are from, they'll be laying in September. So we'll have a look back at the babies again. They typically will depend, breeding will depend on droughts and things like that, but they typically may rest or soar together and hang out in groups. Mated adults will actually soar and they'll do foot touching and kind of have a kind of like display. And females may actually ignore or more often turn over and present claws to male when he's displaying. They do have territories and home ranges sometimes. They can be up to about 100. Typically, there's like 3 to 6 pairs per 100 kilometers, depending on different areas. It can be because of obviously a habitat density, what they can support. Let's have a look at this little guy. Anyway, so both sexes actually may participate in building the nest, so they make quite a big nest. It's up to 2 and 3 in a territory. So if one gets disturbed, they can go to another one. They can be about 1 point. Territories usually have 1.4 nests. The nest is a structure of sticks between 70 to 100 centimeters, about 2 to 3 feet wide, and it'd be about 30 to 80 centimeters or 12 to 31 feet deep, and could be nearly 4 meters across sometimes. So they're quite huge. And good sized nests can be over about 400 kilograms. And so they make these big nests and like to lay them in like eucalyptus trees and things like that. So unlike other or very similar to other eagles, clutch size is usually 1 to 2, but sometimes can actually be up to 4. But 80% of nests will have contain 2 eggs, so that's the mean clutch size. The female will lay them about 3 days apart, with the eggs being like a bluff white color. And the eggs may range between 66 and 79 centimeters, about 2 to 3 inches wide, which is quite interesting, and weigh between 120 to 150 grams, which is about 3 times the size of a chicken egg, which is interesting. So when the eggs hatch, so the eggs will hatch after about 42 to 48 days after incubating, and they actually are called semi-itricial. So they are born a little bit more ready to go than a lot of other types of birds. They have a woolly undercoat, and they do have primaries starting to emerge after a couple of days. And after about 37 days, they can attempt to like rip up food. And 50 days onwards, they'll start to like their coverts will reach their full length. Weight for these guys will actually increase from about 1.7 kilograms or 2 pounds at 15 days, and then about 5.7 pounds in just 30 days. So they grow really, really fast, and those primaries grow quite fast as well. So the female will brood them at first, but the second to birds week, she'll kind of like start to lay off, and she'll help them young. She'll bring them food, but she kind of like leans off about them. And then it takes them about 4 to 6 months to fledge, with juvenile eagles actually really overstaying that welcomers because the parents will kind of scare them off. So then they'll go off and disperse. And they actually, 2/3 of young wedge-tailed eagles may actually die between fledging and by the time they become adults. But they have quite low mortality rates generally. They typically will first breed at about 6 to 7 years of age, and they can be known to live in the wild up to 40 years. So that's quite interesting. So conservation status, they are considered to be between 10,000 and a million individuals. They believe to be only about 10,000 mature individuals in the world, but we don't have much data on that. I believe they are considered least concerns. They are doing okay. As I mentioned, their conservation status is still to be possibly increasing, but they may be scarce. They're probably quite stable, so they've been doing well because of the rapid introductions may have actually helped the species and become more common now because of and also larger prey like sheep and things like that may have helped them. There've been laws actually making it mandatory to kill eagles as vermin, but they've kind of been, I believe, mostly retracted, so they're now protected. Other species, like they're hurt by land development, DDT, which likes their eggs sell soft. Also, urbanization, wind farms, logging, illegal prosecution, drowning in open tanks on roadkill as well. But there have been some conservation needs kind of put in their habitat. So they generally don't need too much, but some areas need a little bit more conservation than others. So like they'd be nesting on hillsides instead of trees inland, some areas. So just making sure. The Tasmanian one is actually quite a good conservation success story. So estimated numbers have gone down About the mid-1990s, there's also believed to be 60, 80 pairs of Tasmanian wedge-tailed eagles left, and that's when they're considered endangered. Uh, but luckily, same hunting as well. They may have actually, the same hunting could have actually helped with the extension of the thylacine. They were hunters as well. There was a bounty on them because the people thought they were killing sheep as well. But luckily, these guys like a lot more old growth forest and seem to carrying capacity. So there has been lots of effort to try and help them as well. Often lead accumulation is a big issue as well because they'll often eat carrion that's been killed by people. But in protected areas, they seem to be doing well. They are endangered, but they're doing a little bit better because of conservation efforts, which is quite cool. But yeah, really, really awesome animal. Definitely a big fan of this guy. So yeah, another great cake mods. Really love the wedge-tailed eagle. Nice to see a big eagle in game. It's funny that it's on the Indian peafowl though. But anyway, I think this is a great place to finish up the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified with anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.